Okay, is it rolling?
Yeah, we're rolling.
Awesome.
Oh, cool. Cool. Well, hey,
Hey,
I'm Katya. This is
MendezMendez.
MendezMendez. We are at Offline Gallery, SuperRare's gallery, and yeah, we're gonna chat about your current work. Before we get into that though, do you mind telling me where you're from, where you've lived, where you're at now?
Sure. So I was born in Spain. I was raised in the Canary Islands and the Dominican Republic. I got into art at a really young age. I was very lucky that I knew what I wanted to do from a very young age. So I've been drawing, painting as a kid, and then got into collage making in 2009. And yeah, it's been quite a journey. Got into Web3 in 2020, and last year started a daily project called The Present. And through the daily practice of this daily project is how I sort of stumbled upon this new body of work that I'm exhibiting with SuperRare.
Yeah, amazing. As for your early influence, did you have a lot of early influences that inspired you to know that you were an artist?
I don't know, from like a young age, I was always just drawn to art. But when in 2009, when I got into collage making, it was through the loss of two of my closest friends. And back then I was already I was doing graphic design, advertising design, and that kind of stuff. And yeah, so
You just got inspired to tap back into the more soulful aspects of your creative process?
in a way, yeah, because I was supposed to be in the car with my two friends who passed away in an accident, and I kept thinking, if I were there, I know I have all this creative skill in me, and all I'm using it for is to make logos, like branding and stuff for companies. So that was the pivotal moment for me. Okay, I'm going to get into an art practice. And to go back to your question about references, there's a Brazilian collage artist called Eduardo Recife, and I was a huge fan of him, and so I studied his work, and he was sort of the main influence for me in collage making. And then throughout the years, I started to develop my own style.
And you studied at FIT, correct?
Yes, I did communication design at FIT, and yeah, it was great. I did a lot of I was telling Josh earlier that I did a lot of classes that I had already know how to do Photoshop. I had been using it for many years, but I really like the painting, the color theory, design principles. All those classes were amazing, and to this day I still think about concepts that I learned there.
Yeah, it's cool to be able to have studied painting, drawing, photography, all these more traditional aspects,
Yeah.
forms of art, and then to amalgamate them into this new practice that you have. And so you have your daily practice, and that has been centered around these collages, digital collages mostly. But the work you're exhibiting right now is quite a departure from that style that you've been doing, and it's using a lot of impressionist influences. Could you tell me about how you stumbled into this flavor or this style?
Yeah, so part of the daily practice is just experimentation. You have to make one piece every day, right? So it's easy to get caught up in just making the same thing. So late last year, I think it was early December, I was browsing art archives and came across this beautiful painting that I was showing you earlier. That was sort of the first impressionist painting that I sourced. And I made a very simple piece of the clear sky with all this pointillism on it and a very small human silhouette. And that was the first piece, the first taste of this style. And I remember I had been wanting to do animated collage for a long time. And I thought, I think I can, if I just sequence different parts of this painting, I could probably make a animated collage out of this new style. And so 3 days later, I recorded myself, my hand, just open it and close it, and then cut out my hand, sequence that into a seamless loop, and retexture the background in my hand with parts of the same painting. And that's the first piece that sort of like gave birth to the series. And so after I made that piece, I was like, all right, this has to become a new body of work. There's no way I'm only making one and just keep doing the other thing. So I kept making these pieces, and from SuperRare DM me once because she saw them on the timeline, and she said, I really enjoy this body of work that you're doing. And we started talking about what are the plans for the series and so on, and slowly but surely we started playing with the idea of releasing, like a larger body of work around this style. And it was partially thanks to her that I, like committed and started making so many pieces. If it wasn't for her, I would have probably made like a few of them and eventually would have made a drop, but I wouldn't have been as focused as I am at the moment on this drop. So yeah, it's exciting. It's also a little bit nerve-wracking to like delve into a completely new style, especially after I've had so much attention and success with my previous body of work. But you know, if I have a vision in my head or an idea to create something, there's no reason for me not to pursue that. So yeah.
That's amazing. It's very cool that your daily practice helped you tap into a new flavor of expression within your work. Do you find that for yourself, or maybe in the digital art realm in general, or maybe in the art realm in general for artists, there's this pressure to kind of stay committed to a style that has been successful for you in the past? And how do you deal with that pressure?
Right, it's a balance. On one hand, you don't want to repeat yourself or become like a one-trick pony, right? On the other hand, it's a tough balance to play, but I do believe that, let's say, if you're going to do one thing, it's more likely that the first time that you do this new thing is not gonna be the best. So like, it takes a lot of repetitions to like become good at something. So that's why developing a style just really requires to put in the reps. So it's tough. It's why musicians, for example, release a second album and it kind of flops because they're known for their previous style, but like this creative drive of like keep exploring new things really drives an artist to like try different styles. It's hard to explain, but yeah, I think it's important for artists to step away from their comfort zone and try new things. Through this experimentation is where you find novel styles. Like I think I'm touching on something very special with this body of work, and if it wasn't for experimentation through the creative process, I wouldn't have found it.
Amazing. Yeah, it's also very interesting your use of these impressionist sources to create these pieces. And I know that you source a lot of them from the public domain because, Impressionism really was at its emerged, over 100 years ago. And it's very interesting to look at that time in art history versus now, because at that time when, I'm sure obviously, but Impressionism, when it first emerged, was very frowned upon.
Yeah.
And it was very, against the grain of the realism at the time. And people were like, what is this? What's the point? And it emerged because of, like new technologies were coming out. Photography became a thing. So you didn't need to create exact replicas of images anymore. And you could kind of explore the abstract a bit more, explore light, explore colors, plein air. And, I think that's very parallel right now in the digital art realm. People are very, very, a lot of people are very opposed to digital art in any form. So I think it's very clever and interesting the way that you're recontextualizing these pieces in this time.
Yes, there's many parallels from the Impressionist era to what's happening today with the digital art market. Mainly the how new technologies allowed for new forms of art and the pushback from the establishment against these new forms of art. The Impressionists got their name from a negative review on a paper who called that famous painting that was submitted to the Salon in Paris, called, "Oh, this is just an impression." And they sort of like double down on that. The same way as Daft Punk got their name from like a negative review from a critic saying, "Oh, this is just Daft Punk." So there's so many parallels to today. And not only am I sourcing from the Impressionist movement, I'm also sourcing the seamless animated loops from Edward Muybridge, who was a contemporary to the Impressionist movement. And he was a photographer who, again, through development of new technologies, and this time in photography, allowed him to capture motion in a way that it hasn't been captured before back then. Interestingly, the themes that both Impressionist and Muybridge documented in their art forms were quite mundane, right? And that was the reason of the pushback. Previously, the main motifs in art were quite established in terms of like mythology, biblical motifs, and so on, where the advancement of technology allowed for paint to be stored inside metal tubes. So now painters could take the easel and go outdoors and paint outdoors instead of inside of a big studio. The brushes before the late 1800s, before the Industrial Revolution, all brushes were round, and the little metal thing that holds on to the brush hairs called ferrule, I think. These were always round. So the Industrial Revolution allowed for thinner, more flat brush tips that allowed for the pointillism to take place. So all these different advancements allowed for these new forms of art. And in the same way, blockchain technology, computers, AI allow for new forms of art. And it's sort of like history repeating itself with the pushback.
How deeply is AI integrated into your creative practice?
At the moment, it's quite integrated. So I've been making art since 2009, and throughout all this decade and a half, I've been sourcing works, like you said, from the public domain. And so I think it was around day number 80 or 90 of my daily practice. I had this very specific idea that I sketched that I couldn't have made it without creating some new assets. So like I was experimenting with 3D, but I didn't really like the aesthetic of the 3D render. I felt really cold and sort of like soulless. And so I said, you know why? I'm just going to like use these text to image tools to generate the assets that I need in order to like materialize these ideas that I have, right? So that was the first time that I used it. And since then, it has allowed me to really just create what I really want, as opposed to create in a more, sorry, blanking on the word. Instead of creating in a more improvised manner, which was the way that I used to create with traditional digital collage, which was download a few images, play with them, see how they work together, and like it was more improvised as opposed to more intentional. And so now, instead of creating works of art through collage making that are very aesthetic and improvised, I'm able to create more specific, more intentional, more conceptual pieces that have been just sort of enabled by just creating my own source material. Also, it has allowed me to sort of like step away from the traditional aesthetic of digital collage. I remember making this very extended thread on Twitter about my process, in which I made an example. All collage makers or digital collage makers, we source from the same places. There's only so many public domain paintings to be sourcing from, right? So like what ends up happening is that you have like 3 or 4 artists using the exact same painting as the main subject for a piece, and like it's a very specific style that can be that it's hard to like break away through those means. And so using AI has allowed me to sort of like break away from that traditional style and just create my own signature style.
Okay, how do you define collage? Because if you're not only creating your own source materials, but then also placing them in the composition,
Mm-hmm.
in my understanding, collage is generally defined as relying on existing pieces and then recontextualizing them. If you're creating your own source material, do you still call that collage?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's even collage. I don't know. I tend to call it. I mean, I've stepped away from calling it collage because, by definition, it's not entirely that. So I started calling it mixed digital media because that's really what it is. So I don't use exclusively AI content to create my pieces. If you go through my dailies, you'll see very recurrent motifs. You see like these clouds in the sky, and you see the stars. So the stars are taken from a picture from the Hubble telescope, and the clouds and the blue skies are taken from a painting from the 1800s. And then the human forms are generated with AI. But then on top of that, I use a texture that I created from a Rembrandt picture with all this crackling on it. So, like I'm using a picture from a telescope, a painting from the 1800s, AI, and like another painting from like Rembrandt. It's I guess by definition, you're collaging together different things from different like very different mediums. So maybe mixed digital media is a better definition for it.
Cool. Yeah. It's kind of reminiscent of the way musicians sample music. Sometimes they'll take songs from certain vinyl records, or they'll take sounds from cars passing by, or like tapping from the raindrops or something, and combine it all into these layers. So that's really cool.
That's a great analogy, and I've used that analogy in the past. And what's interesting is that there are now hip hop producers who are also sampling from AI music. They're generating AI tracks, and they're generating, for example, like an AI soulful track that doesn't exist, which is a very common source of sampling in the industry, and they'll sample from that and create new beats from it. So like it's a novel technique. It's to be able to like generate your source material for sampling, for collage making, or even I would bet that painters are also generating references to create paintings with AI.
What is your response to people who have very strong negative pushback against using AI in art?
I get it. I get it. There's a moral dilemma in using these text to image tools because they were trained on a bunch of like copyrighted content. I try to mitigate this by making sure that when I'm prompting, I reference art periods that are in the public domain. I would never prompt in the style of a contemporary artist. I think that's highly immoral. So I think there's a moral spectrum in how you use these tools. The same way that there's a moral spectrum in the way you use a knife or the internet or a gun. Like you could use it to save a life or to take one. So like there's a moral dilemma with eating meat. We still eat it, right? Like it's some you have to sort of like how do you say it? You have to do you have to sort of compromise at some point and say yes, this is probably like not entirely morally correct, but if it still serves my vision and my creative output in a way that's not directly harming someone, I'm gonna do it.
Do you think that the future of art, or the future of individual thought and idea and expression and creativity, is at danger with the increased use of AI?
Maybe the same way that having a smartphone keeps you from memorizing numbers. We are outsourcing a lot of thought process to these tools, and it's important to like have some sort of balance. Use them for our convenience and our favor, but at the same time being aware that they can take away creativity, they can take away memory, they can take away thought process. So like if you use an AI tool to write an essay for you, you're not gonna remember anything. Like, it's not, you didn't make it, right? Like it was something else that made it, and yeah, you can get away with like getting a passing grade using that essay, but you are diminishing your ability to write. So it's important to use them with responsibility as any tool.
You mentioned earlier that for the next era of your daily practice, you're going to specifically not be using AI.
Yes, this is a thought that I had recently, because in the same vein of this conversation, I have found myself to be relying too much on these tools, and for over a decade I didn't have these tools, and I create really like valuable and work that I'm proud of. So I thought, what would be a great challenge in my daily practice, and that would be, okay, I'm gonna take 1 month and not use AI at all. I'm gonna go back to my roots of like traditional collage making, and I'll be using just source material again. I believe that through this experiment, I'm going to find maybe a new style, a new body of work, and that's sort of like at the core, the main purpose of the daily practice is not only to like learn new tools, but also like experiment enough in order to like find new bodies of work.
Which day are you on of this daily practice?
I think it's 572.
572.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
It's a lot.
Whenever you have your year anniversaries, do you have a big celebration or anything?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, not really. I try to make the artwork of the anniversary like relate to the anniversary. So like I've only done one, which was I did like a little piece of cake with cloud textures and a candle for my first daily birthday. It's coming up on January 15th of 2026. So like I'll figure out what I'll do.
And what was the original inspiration for doing this daily practice?
So at the end of 2023, that was like at the bottom of the bear market, and I had a few drops not do as well as I usually do. This led me into this like sort of like insecurity rabbit hole. Questioning like, am I not good enough anymore? You start to question all these things, and the way I was operating before was, I will make 1 or 2, 3 pieces, and I would try to sell them. And then I would make 1 or 2 pieces, and I would try to sell them. And I found myself in this very deep creative block. And listen to Atomic Habits. I took a few ideas from that book, and I thought, okay, it would be really cool to get together with a group of artists and create a 28-day challenge of daily pieces. So initially, it wasn't meant to be like dailies forever. It was going to be 28 days. I got together with 7 or 8 friends in the space, and I said, okay, we're going to make one piece every day. We're going to do this chat group where we share our piece every single day. If someone misses a day, they're getting kicked out of the chat. So there's a little bit of a stake in it, and everybody hated it. Like, I had illustrators, painters, photographers. Everyone was like, dude, why did I do this? This is adding so much pressure in my day-to-day life. And for me, it was the opposite. 2 weeks into the project, I had like a big project reach out to me who I've been chasing for 2 years. And I was like, wow, like I think this is an interesting strategy of like, like what kind of signal are you sending out by putting out all this work without trying to like sell it or anything like that. So like I got lucky, one of those pieces went a little viral, caught the attention of this project, came to me, and I thought, okay, I think this is the way forward. So the 28 days ended, all those people hate me now, and I said, you know what, like I'm doubling down. This is not like this is my life now. Like I'm just gonna like keep doing this.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how do you manage that when you're traveling or things like that? Do you sit on the plane and you with your knife and
Well, literally, yeah. On my way to Charleston, earlier, my way to the States earlier this week, I made a piece on the plane. Usually, if I know I have a trip coming up, I try to make more than one piece per day, so I have like a little bit of a buffer.
Mhm.
So when I'm traveling, I did this for like a few trips where I would take a trip for 1 week, and I had 7 pieces already made, so I don't have to like work on vacation.
Okay.
But I've been traveling so much this year that I've run out of buffer, and I'm just going day by day. So last night I made yesterday's daily from the hotel room. Yes, today's daily I'm gonna make also from the hotel room after this.
Do you find that in this age of social media, all the noise from the digital realm, this pressure to pay attention to your floor price as an artist, this pressure to appeal to collectors, all these external things that are beyond the actual practice of making the art, doing this daily practice helps keep you grounded?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I still pay attention to those things, but the way I'm conducting the sort of perceived value of my work now is through public auctions. I really just let the public sort of dictate the value of my work, and from then on, whatever average price from the auctions, I just take that, and that becomes like the new, like price for any private sales that might come up. Um, but I don't know why. For some reason, I've been really lucky, and I've attracted collectors who are really into the art with very little intention of selling it. So there's this, like there's this profile of collector who's more of a trader. If you blow up too fast and there's a lot of hype behind your name, whatever you do is going to attract that profile, and that's a very easy way to like lose value quickly, because if you can't maintain that hype, then they're gonna say, oh, this was a bad trade, I'm gonna like sell for a loss and like go on to the next thing. So I've been really lucky that, for example, I've sold in the series of the dailies, I've sold 82 pieces, and none of them are listed. Like the secondary is not very active because nobody wants to sell them, so I'm very lucky.
Do you have any advice for artists who are interested in exploring the digital realm?
Yeah, I think you the way to approach this as a newcomer would be to enter the space, post a lot of art, create a lot of art, start building a following, start building a community, and wait until there's a bit of demand for your work. Like you shouldn't be putting out work for sale until there's someone telling you, "Hey, I want to buy this from you." I feel like there's a lot of pressure and expectations from artists, and and I feel like a lot of people who come into the space, the first thing they do is just like post something for sale and like start spamming this piece, right? And that's a very bad look in the eyes of the collectors. You want to sort of manage your demand in a way that you're able to build up on momentum as little as it doesn't matter if you sell your first piece for $5, but then try to sell your next one for $10, and then the next one for 20 and for 50. So like build up little by little, and make sure you're constantly creating demand by merit, by quality of work, by your socializing skills. I mean, there's many factors that you have to take into account, and not everyone's really good at all of those factors. But if you're not really good with social skills, make sure that your art is on point, that you have a good output. And so yeah, so it's like I've been asked this question before. Like the analogy that I have is like you wouldn't ask your boyfriend, or in case your girlfriend, uh, to marry you if you weren't sure that they were gonna say yes, right? Like if you had no idea if they were gonna say yes, like that's a big gamble. So like in the same way, I would approach minting it and selling ours. Like make sure there's a little bit of demand before you put it out, and then just build up a momentum.
And what originally inspired you to enter the digital art realm versus pursuing a more traditional path?
Well, I always saw the traditional art world as impenetrable
Yeah.
from a point of view of a digital artist. I know that's not necessarily the case, but I don't have like um, a master's in fine art. I'm not connected with the traditional art world, and so to be able to find a market that is permissionless, that I can just join and sell and trade instantly was amazing. The way I got into it was through a contact. I used to I used to do commercial artwork for record labels, and so that was sort of like my bread and butter. I would create album covers and festival posters and all this stuff. That's how I sort of like made money from my art as a commercial artist. And one day, one of the record label heads was like, "Hey, you should check out this website called Writable." And I was like, "Okay." And I was already like, I was mining ETH, so I was knowledgeable in the technology. And man, like when I first saw that website and it's like pieces of art selling for ETH, I was like, "What is this?" And then I found out about the royalty system, where like in the secondary you always get royalties. I was like, "This is incredible." I immediately saw this as a sort of like a level playing game for artists to like get introduced to like a completely new art world in parallel to the traditional art world. And so yeah, I started and since I had hundreds of works from a decade of experience ready, I started minting these pieces of like previous work quickly right now because I was able to like sort of like work on this momentum that I was telling you. And as soon as I ran out, I started thinking, okay, now I have to start thinking in series. And that was my biggest sort of like, I was jealous of traditional artists who could dedicate all this time to like work on a series, a cohesive body of work, as opposed to just commission to commission to commission. And so that was pivotal for me. And yeah, and slowly I started firing clients, and now I don't do any commission work. I just do whatever I want, and thankfully there's people out there who appreciate it enough to collect it.
Amazing. A lot of the motifs in your earlier work are very surrealist, a lot of aliens and monkeys, but also like royalty and motifs that are somewhat reminiscent of the Romantic and Renaissance and Realism eras. And then now this newest collection being inspired in Impressionist work. Do you have any further thoughts on this sort of trajectory that you've been following?
Well, in collage making, the source material sort of like shapes the vibe of the artwork, right? So when I was sourcing from from Renaissance and the Baroque periods, those images have an inherent quality and aesthetic that it's going to be part of the artwork. So my idea was always to be thinking, okay, what if the surrealist movement had taken place in the 1400s and 1500s, during the Renaissance? And that was sort of my
Frame.
Yeah, my framing, my the lens through which I looked at my work. And so like I would take all these techniques and motifs from the surreal movement and try to like execute those with found material from the Renaissance movement. The source material sort of like shapes the work. And so when I started sourcing from the Impressionist movement, I began studying the movement, and that's when I realized all these parallels to digital art and our scene. And I sort of like fell in love with Paul Signac and Paul Signac and George Seurat. Sorry. So I fell in love with Paul Signac and George Seurat's work because of their sort of scientific approach to the perception of color and shading. So they developed this technique called pointillism, or divisionism also called, which instead of blending colors to give the impression of volume and light, they use individual dots of color that optically, to the human eye, it's perceived as shading and volume and light. So that felt really, really interesting. And in their paintings, there are also these vast areas of skies, fields, ocean shores, and all these things that were perfect for me to like use as source material to retexture these animated works.
Yeah, the pointillism is very parallel to pixels.
Yes, yes, and that's again, all of these things just sort of happen. I don't sit down and write down this grandiose idea of like what my next body of work is gonna be. I just work, and then I sort of like understand what the work means. And once I have this back and forth, okay, I create this. This is what that means. This is what this represents. Now I have a framework of how to approach the remaining pieces in the body of work. Now I know what to look for. Now I know what to like really focus on. And yeah, so then Edward Muybridge, who was a contemporary to the Impressionists, when I discovered his, I was just looking for source material to put in front of these layered animated painted textures. And so he was also documenting the same things as the Impressionists did, just through a different medium. And interesting, what end up happening is, to your point of like this pixelated quality to it with like painted materials, is that it creates this sort of like glitch effect, very original and native to the digital art movement, but using, instead of pixels, dots of paint through the impressionist the pointillist technique.
Amazing. And for the actual motifs that are in the pieces that you're currently displaying, what inspires you to say, this one's going to be a cat, this one's going to be a man walking upstairs,
Yeah.
This one's going to be, what inspires the actual figures?
Right. So, keeping in line with the motifs of the Impressionists, they rebelled against the establishment, the art establishment back then, by avoiding the pre-existing, and approved motifs, and they just documented everyday life. So even in the pieces that I don't source from Newbridge, for the actual subject that's animated, uh, I film myself. I film, for example, myself walking, myself like scrolling on a phone, or even in the found footage that I use, I try to like stay true to those original motifs from the Impressionist movement. So that's sort of like where the direction for these extremely mundane, everyday, ordinary scenes come from.
I have like one more like kind of like big question, and then maybe we can like wrap it up.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's kind of a big sort of societal question that's being grappled with right now is, in a way, the snake is eating its own tail, the data is running out. And once you've moved from like the Renaissance now into Impressionist, next is going to be actual surrealism, and then it's going to be, and then all of a sudden there's no more public domain archive prices, it'll just be whatever by each year. And that's kind of culturally happening as well, we're like recycling these trends.
Yeah.
And this kind of question on everyone's mind is, what does the actual future of culture look like once we've recycled all these things to their bitter end? So how is that informing the future of your process, and do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like you said, we're gonna run out of trends. We're gonna run out of like periods that we're going to like revive, and so I think that's going to just cause for new forms of media, new forms of art, new styles. There are, like current art movements that are happening right now. There are like contemporary. They're completely new, novel, and I think digital mixed media is one of them. Now, I have pieces where I have 3D photography, AI paintings, my own illustrations, all in one single piece, and I think that's something novel. using blockchain as a medium is a completely new form of art that wasn't possible, like just a decade ago. So as in the same vein of the Impressionists, as technology evolves, new mediums and new forms of art are going to go on with it.
Do you see your practice including more and more physical work in the future? Or do you think that you are generally probably going to keep staying in the digital realm?
No, I think so. I would love to have a bigger studio space because there are so many motifs that I've discovered through my daily practice and my previous work that I think would translate really well to sculpture. And so I would love in the next decade to explore sculpture as well as big, like large canvas paintings. Yeah, I think, once I run out of like for example, my idea of doing a whole month of dailies without AI is sort of like I'm trying to rebel against using the same source material. So there's this drive of looking for new things, looking for new source material. There are new works from the public domain that keep getting digitized, and so like new things become available to use, and yes, even though there's only so much work in the public domain to be used, it's hard, like it's impossible to like go through it all in just one lifetime. There's hundreds, if not millions, of pieces out there. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to just keep experimenting, keep exploring, and trying new things and see where it takes me. I'm 38, so if I have maybe another 30 or 40 years of art in me, a lot of things can happen.
Amazing. Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Is there anything within this series the average eye might miss? Are there any secret little motifs or hidden little things that you've kind of embedded in there?
There's no Easter eggs in the series, but I think that at face value, the series may be interpreted as just like pretty animations to look at. Where if you actually read more about the series and see how this is just a reinterpretation of the same sort of like emotions and intentions from the original movement of the Impressionism, I think that's where the depth of the series really takes place. There was also a music impressionist movement, and that music is what I'll be playing during the show and be using for the promotional content. So there's something very special about experiencing music, photography, and paintings all brought together through digital tools in one single moment. I think it's a very novel aesthetic experience.
Amazing. Cool. Check out.
Thank you.
Check it out.